Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofOutlander.com. For all things Outlander, from the Dinah Gabaldon book series to the Stars TV series and everything in between. This is podcast episode 141, and it's week 26 of the Drums of Autumn read-along. This week we are covering chapters 49 and 50, and I'm calling this episode Truth and Consequences. I'm going to put out a big warning at the top of the episode, like the last two. This podcast contains discussion about serious topics, and they are not safe for work or for young ears. We will be talking about abortion, rape, and hastening death along. So I would suggest that no one should be listening who is under 14 years old because of the sensitivity of these topics. And the summary goes something like this. Claire contemplated offering and performing an abortion if Brianna wanted it. She and Jamie fought over the mere idea of it. Brianna wanted to keep the baby. Young Ian proposed to Brianna at the behest of Jamie. Brianna refused the offer. A fight ensued between her and Jamie. Later, the truth came out after Brianna described Roger, sketched a likeness, and gave his true family name. The fair fight on the mountain was discussed. Jamie and young Ian gave Roger to the Iroquois. Jamie accused Brianna of crying wolf. The gold ring was revealed. Bonnet was the rapist. Claire felt guilty. Jamie internally raged. Young Ian was stunned. Brianna was brutally honest. Inside the chapters, Chapter 49, Choices, November 1769. Claire was going through her medicine box that used to belong to Daniel Rawlings. She was going through the contents, contemplating offering Brianna an abortion. She said something aloud, but didn't expect a response. When Jamie answered the question, she jumped and sliced herself with the blade she was holding. She told Jamie she was going to use the blade to cut up the root, but he'd only seen her use the blades on people. He asked her what she was doing. "What in heaven's name are you about, Sassenach? You look as though I'd surprised you about to commit murder." My lips felt stiff and bloodless. I pulled my thumb out of his grasp and sat down, holding the wounded digit against my bosom with my other hand. "I was deciding," I said, with great reluctance. It was no good to lie. He would have to know sooner or later. If Bree. "Deciding what?" "About Bree. What was the best way to do it?" "To do it?" His eyebrows shot up. He glanced at the open medicine case, then at the scalpel, and a look of sudden shocked comprehension washed over his face. "You mean to?" "If she wants me to." I touched the knife, its small blade stained with my own blood. "There are herbs, or this. There are awful risks to using herbs, convulsions, brain damage, hemorrhage, but it doesn't matter. I don't have enough of the right kind." "Claire, have you done it before?" I looked up to see him looking down at me, with something I had never seen in his eyes before, horror. I pressed my hands flat on the table to stop them trembling. I didn't do as well with my voice. "Would it make a difference to you if I had?" He stared at me for a moment, then eased himself down on the bench opposite, slowly, as though afraid he might break something. "You haven't done it," he said softly. "I know it." "No," I said. I stared down at his hand, covering mine. "No, I haven't." She went on to tell him about her patient Graham Menzies, that she helped to die. He thought of Graham as a mercy killing, and even duty to help him out of his misery. He reminded her of Dougal easing Rupert after Falkirk and hastening his death. Isn't it the duty of a doctor who cannot heal a patient and save the man from pain? Claire agreed and tried to explain why she wanted to offer the choice to Brianna. Don't you think I haven't thought about it? That I don't know what the risks are? Jamie, I could kill her! I pulled the cloth off my wounded thumb. The cut was still oozing. Look, it shouldn't bleed like that. It's a deep cut, but not a bad one. But it does. I hit a vein. I could do the same thing to Bree and never know it until she began to bleed. And if so, Jamie, I couldn't stop it. She breathed to death under my hand, and there isn't a thing I could do about it. Not a thing. He looked at me, eyes dark with shock. How could you think of doing such a thing, knowing that? His voice was soft, with disbelief. I drew a deep, trembling breath and felt despair wash over me. There was no way to make him understand. No way. Because I know other things, I said at last, very softly, not looking at him. I know what it is to bear a child. I know what it is to have your body and your mind and your soul taken from you and changed without your will. I know what it is to be ripped out of the place you thought was yours, to have choice taken from you. I know what it is, do you hear me? And it isn't something anyone should do without being willing. I looked up at him, and my fist clenched hard on my wounded thumb. And you, for God's sake, you know what I don't, what it's like to live with the knowledge of violation. Do you mean to tell me that if I could have cut that from you after Wentworth, that you wouldn't have had me do it, no matter what the risks? Jamie, that may be a rapist's child. I know. I know. But I know the one thing else. If I dinna ken his father, I ken his grandsire well enough. Claire, that is a child of my blood. Your blood? I echoed. I stared at him, the truth dawning on me. You want a grandchild badly enough to sacrifice your daughter? Sacrifice? It isna me that's meaning to commit slaughter in cold blood. You didn't mind the angel makers at Hôpital des Anges. You had pity for the women they helped. You said so. Those women had nae choice. Too agitated to sit, he got up and paced restlessly back and forth in front of me. They had no one to protect them, no way to feed a child. What else could they do, poor creatures? But it isna so for Brianna. I will never let her be hungry or cold. Never let aught harm her or the bairn. Never. That isn't all there is to it. If she bears a child here, she won't leave. She can't. Not without tearing herself apart. So you mean to tear her apart? I flinched as though he'd struck me. The conversation turned ugly as they discussed the various aspects of the situation. So that was it. Not the question of paternity, but that Brianna would have to stay in the 18th century. They argued more. The other truth was revealed, that Jamie wanted nothing more than a child of his blood. More tension arose as he grabbed her bleeding hand and held it above her, claiming her arrogance, believing she had the power over life and death. To Claire, it was about offering the choice. To Jamie, it was about murdering his grandchild. Claire believed it was no different than Jamie acting in a manner to protect another, even if it meant a death occurred. Jamie left with only the word, please. Claire was upset by the fight. She wondered if it would be safer to take Brianna to Cross Creek, but decided her daughter was safer with her. She thought about what Jamie's please had meant. Please, he'd said. Please what? Please don't ask her. Please don't do it if she asks. But I had to. I swear by Apollo the physician, not to cut for stone, nor to procure abortion. Well, and Hippocrates was neither a surgeon, a woman, nor a mother. As I told Jamie, I'd sworn by something a lot older than Apollo the physician, and that oath was in blood. I never had done an abortion, though I'd had some experience as a resident in the post-care of miscarriage. On the rare occasion a patient had asked it of me, I'd referred them to a colleague. I had no absolute objection. I had seen too many women killed in body or spirit by untimely children. If it was killing, and it was, then I thought it not murder, but a justifiable homicide, undertaken in desperate self-defense. At the same time, I could not bring myself to do it. The surgeon's sense that gave me knowledge of the flesh under my hands gave me also an acute awareness for the living contents of the womb. I could touch a pregnant woman's belly and feel in my fingertips the second beating heart, could trace unseeing the curve of limb and head and the snake-like curl of the umbilicus with its rush of blood all red and blue. I could not bring myself to destroy it, not until now, when it was a matter of killing my own flesh and blood. So Claire had always understood it. She wasn't opposed to abortion. She could see the gray in between the black and white. She could see the humanity in a decision like this when it had to be made. Interesting that it would be called justifiable homicide because there was no other option for the woman at the time. But now it became personal to Claire. She could see the havoc it might wreak on Brianna and that she would be trapped in the 18th century. What do you think about that? I could see her offering it to her, but it's pretty risky when you get to past the 12-week mark. I mean, it is. It's not like it is in very early first trimester. And without proper medications or even proper doses of herbs early on, which cannot be used safely after a certain point, just like you cannot use medication today after a certain point in pregnancy. This is a challenging situation. Claire thought more about the procedure, how she would do it. Claire saw Brianna's horse in the penfold and went to offer her the choice. Brianna had thought about it when she figured out she was pregnant. Claire explained it would have to be surgical with the gestation of the pregnancy. Brianna asked if Claire would have aborted her. "Would you have done it if you could?" "If I could? You said once that you hated me when you were pregnant. If you could have not been." "God, not you," I blurted, horror-stricken. "Not you, ever. It—" I knotted my hands together to still their trembling. "No," I said, as positively as I could. "Never." "You did say so," she said, looking at me intently, "when you told me about Da." I rubbed a hand across my face, trying to focus my thoughts. Yes, I had told her that. Idiot. It was a horrible time, terrible. We were starving. It was war. The world was coming apart at the seams. Wasn't hers. At the time, it seemed as though there was no hope. I had to leave Jamie, and the thought drove almost everything else out of my mind. But there was one thing, I said. "What was that?" "It wasn't rape," I said softly, meeting her eyes. "I loved your father." She nodded, her face a little pale. "Yes, but it might be Roger's. You did say that, didn't you?" "Yes, it might. Is the possibility enough for you?" Brianna went on to tell her how she felt about the pregnancy. "Yeah, well, it isn't an it to me. I don't know who it is, but—" She stopped suddenly and glanced at me, looking suddenly shy. "I don't know if this sounds, well—" She shrugged abruptly, dismissing doubt. "I had this sharp pain that woke me up in the middle of the night a few days after. Quick, like somebody had stabbed me with a hatpin, but deep." Her fingers curled inward, her fist pressing just above her pubic bone on the right side. Claire explained implantation, and Brianna said at the moment of implantation she knew someone else was with her. Claire remembered faith and how she was given 2 miracles, though no longer part of her physically, had never left her completely. Claire worried Brianna didn't know how much she loved her. Brianna knew, and had always known. Brianna could not and would not abort the baby. Claire didn't want to offer the option to Brianna, but felt compelled given all the circumstances. Claire confuses me a bit in this situation. She had never been able to perform abortions in the 20th century, but could offer it to her child out of fear and concern for her future. I understand why she would do it. It's just interesting that she could do it, only because it was her flesh and blood. I suppose that's just her maternal instincts kicking in and wanting to do whatever Brianna needed of her and to secure her future, if she could. This chapter is meant to show us the complexities involved in abortion. It is not black and white. It isn't a question of whether or not the fetus is living for Claire. It is her being terrified Brianna will be stuck or harmed. To Jamie, who has killed countless men, a matter of unnecessary murder and taking the life of an unborn without exigent circumstances. To Brianna, she carries a baby, her baby, and she cannot choose to part with him or her. Women carry the joy and the burden of being the ones who grow and birth the children. The burden is in the physical risk and alteration women must undergo in the process of pregnancy and birth. The burden is in the cultural, religious, governmental, and individual mindsets surrounding sexuality, marriage, and procreation. The burden is in not being able to hide it. The burden is in the responsibility and consequences being held entirely by women because we get pregnant, not men. Vilifying women is easy. It is easy for men to hold, no burden. A man can have children by multiple women, and it's fine. A woman to have children by multiple men is a whore. Someone is having sex with the women who became pregnant. It has happened since time began, but only women are held to an untenable standard and punished. And it saddens me greatly that women feel it is the only option, so they may have a future or put the experience and story in there of yourself or people you know. My heart is huge for women who've had abortions. I never judge, and I only offer love. I judge our culture that perpetuates the need for women to have abortions because we are held in the crosshairs of the societies in which we live, because we are the ones left holding the bag. So we're the ones ultimately responsible for everything. Yes, it's a very tender topic and a difficult one. I don't believe it should be outlawed. Women will have abortions regardless of what the government says. So having safe options is important. And I know not everyone will agree with me on that. I have a very complicated and complex point of view on the topic. Part of it is my personal belief system. The other part is my professional belief system. And my understanding that everybody is not in the same situation that I'm in. And many women who have abortions are married and have other children. This is not only one group of women being affected. And I dare say for most, it is not an easy decision or choice. It's the choice they feel compelled to make. It is. It is wholly not a black and white issue for me, though it grieves me deeply. That's it. My heart only overflows with love because I've never had to be in a position to make that choice. Never. I've never felt like I couldn't greet the child I became pregnant with. And that's a pretty privileged perspective to be in. I remember a friend of mine from a long, long time ago, when she was 18, went to live in a home for young unwed women, and she adopted her child out. I was stunned because this, was in the late 80s. This wasn't the 40s, the 50s, even the 60s. But she was still a shame to her family. I will tell each of you, you are not a shame to your family. You do not bring dishonor to your family. I know too many of you have had dishonor brought upon you by the responses of your family and the treatment of you and being kicked out of your family home because you became pregnant, and it doesn't matter how you became pregnant. Chapter 50, in which all is revealed. There was still no word about Roger. Brianna did not discuss him any longer, but it was obvious she thought about him. Claire took stock in the pantry to hide from the mood in the cabin. The winter preparations of foraging, preserving, and stocking had been done. The pantry was full and ready for the long months ahead. Young Ian popped in and asked for a mirror and comb. He had bathed, scrubbed his skin, and slicked his unruly hair back. He wore his best outfit, too. Claire wondered where he was going. He planned to court someone and needed to look good. Now, there weren't a great many women who were available on the ridge. Claire asked if she knew the girl. Aye. Well, it's Brianna. He wouldn't meet my eyes, but the flush rose slowly over his face. What? I said incredulously. I set down the slice of bread I was holding and stared at him. Did you say Brianna? His eyes were fixed on the floor, but his jaw was set stubbornly. Brianna, he repeated. I've come to make her proposal of marriage. Ian, you can't possibly mean that. I do, he said, sticking out his long, square chin in a determined manner. He glanced toward the window and shuffled his feet. Well, is she coming in soon, do you think? Well, that's a lovely surprise, is it not? He was doing it to give the baby a name, save Brianna's reputation. And no, he didn't love her. It also was not his idea, it was Jamie's plan. And Claire did not like it one bit. Brianna returned, and she didn't allow him to finish his proposal. She was angry and left the cabin in a whirl of skirts. Ian was thankful Brianna hadn't hit him. The Fraser temper was about to strike. Why on earth would you put poor little Ian up to such a thing? Brianna was saying, her voice high with indignation. I've never heard of such a high-handed, arrogant... Poor little Ian, Ian said, vastly affronted. What does she? Oh, high-handed am I? Jamie's voice interrupted. He sounded both impatient and irritable, though not yet angry. Perhaps I was in time to avert full-scale hostilities. I peeked through the stable door to see them face to face, glaring at each other over a large pile of half-dried manure. And what better choice could I make? Will you tell me that? He demanded. Let me tell you, lassie, I thought of every bachelor in 50 miles before he settled on Ian. I wouldna have you wed to a cruel man or drunkard, nor yet a poor man, nor one old enough to be your grandsire either. He shoved a hand through his hair, sure sign of mental agitation, but made a masterful effort to calm himself. He lowered his voice a bit, trying to be conciliatory. Why, I even put aside Thomas MacDonald, for while he's a fine stretch of land and a good temper, and he's an age for you, he's a bitty wee fellow forby, and I thought you would not care to stand up side by side with him before a priest. Believe me, Brianna, I've done my best to see you well wed. Oh, this is not going to go well. Brianna refused to marry anyone, not even for the sake of the baby. So Jamie took it to a whole other level. And what makes you think I want to be married to anybody at all? His mouth dropped open. Want, he said incredulously. And what has want to do with it? Everything, she stamped her foot. Now there, you're wrong, lassie, he advised her, turning to pick up his fork. He eyed her stomach with a nod. You've a bairn coming. You need a name. Your time to be choosy is long past, aye? Now Ian's a sweet-tempered lad and a hard worker. He's got his own land. He'll have mine too, in time, and that will. I'm not going to marry anybody. Well then, make your own choice, Jamie said shortly, and I wish you well of it. You are not listening. I've made my choice. I said I won't marry anyone. She punctuated this with another stamp of her foot. I will. I seem to recall hearing a very similar opinion expressed by your mother the night before our wedding. I haven't asked her lately, does she regret being forced to wed me or not? But I flatter myself she's maybe not been miserable altogether. Perhaps you should go have a word with her. It's not the same thing. He dropped his hand. I could see them both, despite the fading light, and saw the danger signs all too clearly in the narrowing of his eyes and the set of his shoulders squared for battle. Is that how Frank Randall raised you, lass, to have no regard for what's right or wrong? Brianna was trembling all over like a horse that's run too far. My father always did what was right for me, and he would never have tried to pull something like this. Never. He cared about me. Tempers were flaring higher, with Jamie angry. She believed he wasn't trying to protect her. He called her reckless. She called him a bastard. Bastard? You'll call me a bastard and your belly swelling like a pumpkin with the child that you mean to doom to finger-pointing and calumny for all its days, and anybody points a finger at my child and I'll break it off and stuff it down their throat. You senseless wee bizzum. Have you no the faintest notion of how things are? You'll be a scandal and a hissing. Folk will call you whore to your face. Let them try it. Oh, let them try it. And you mean to stand by and listen, I suppose? It's not your job to defend me. He was so furious that his face went white as fresh bleached muslin. Not my job to defend you, for Christ's sake, woman. Who else is meant to do it? At this point, young Ian told Claire she needed to throw cold water on them or let them at it. Eventually, they would become hungry. Jamie stormed off and took a horse to Fergus's place. Brianna stomped back to the cabin. Claire silently cursed Roger Wakefield. Brianna went to look for eggs in the bushes and returned in better spirits. Jamie returned at dinner time sweaty and also in better spirits. Jamie and Brianna ignored each other. There were glares and limited dinner conversation. Claire instructed Jamie to apologize. What am I to do? Apologize. Apologize? His hair seemed to be standing on end, though it was likely only the effects of the wind. But I have not done anything wrong. Well, what difference does that make? I said, exasperated. You asked me what you should do, and I told you. He went over to Brianna and apologized. The walls were broken down. They talked and made up. She planned to wait for Roger. She knew he wasn't dead. Jamie told her how far he had sent word looking for Roger. What else could he do? He had an idea. Brianna began to describe Roger. Tall, Nearly as tall as you, Daw. People would notice. They always look at you. He has black hair and green eyes, bright green. It's one of the first things you notice about him, isn't it, Mama? Ian gave a small start and looked up from his grooming. Yes, I said, sitting down on the bench next to Brianna. But you can maybe do better than just the written description. Brie's a good hand with the likeness, I explained to Jamie. Can you draw Roger from memory, do you think, Brie? Yes! She reached for the quill, eager to try. Yes, I'm sure I can. I've drawn him before. Jamie surrendered the quill and paper, the vertical lines between his brows showing in a slight frown. Brianna drew the sketch. Jamie and young Ian acted oddly. What on earth is the matter? I asked. Oh, nothing. The muscles of his throat moved in a convulsive swallow. The corner of his mouth twitched and twitched again as though he couldn't control it. Like hell it is. Alarmed, I leaned across the table, seizing his wrist and groping for his pulse. Jamie, what is it? Are you having chest pains? Do you feel ill? I do. Ian was leaning over the table, looking as though he might be going to throw up any minute. 'Cause, do you mean honestly to tell me that this is Roger Wakefield? Yes, she said, looking up in puzzlement. Ian, are you all right? Did you eat something funny? He didn't answer, but dropped heavily onto the bench beside her, put his head in his hands, and groaned. Jamie gently detached his hand from my grip. Even in the red of the firelight, I could see that he was white and strained. The hand on the table curled around the quill jar as though seeking support. Mr. Wakefield, he said carefully to Brianna. Has he by any chance another name? Yes, Brianna and I said in unison. The truth is about to come out. Claire fetched brandy. Brianna explained about Roger's adoption and asked if they heard of a Roger Mackenzie. In fact, they had. Aye, we have. On the mountain. What? Here? On this mountain? She stood up, pushing back the bench. Alarm and excitement played over her face like flames. Where is he? What happened? Well, Ian said defensively, he did say as he'd taken your maidenhead after all. He what? Brianna's eyes sprang open so far that a rim of white showed all around the iris. Well, your da asked him, just to be sure, and he admitted that he'd... You what? Brianna rounded on Jamie, clenched fists on the table. I will. It was a mistake. He looked utterly wretched. You bet it was. What in the name of... What have you done? Her own cheeks had blanched, and blue sparks glinted in her eyes, hot as the heart of a flame. Jamie took a deep breath. He looked up straight into her face and set his jaw. The wee lassie, he said. Lizzie, she told me that you were with child, and that the man who'd got it on you was a wicked brute called Mackenzie. Jamie further explained what happened after Lizzie told him about it. Young Ian and Jamie told her it was a fair fight. She screamed at them. What have you done with him? Jamie blinked and Ian flinched. They exchanged haunting glances. I put a hand on Jamie's arm, squeezing tight. I couldn't keep the quaver out of my own voice as I asked the necessary question. Jamie, did you kill him? He glanced at me and the tension in his face relaxed, if only marginally. No, he said. I gave him to the Iroquois. Oh, because that's so much better than killing him. Brianna felt ill. Young Ian assured her it could have been worse, since they had meant to kill him after all. Brianna needed to hear the whole story, including what Roger had said during the altercation. What? What did he say? Even her lips were white. So were Jamie's. He'd said that you'd asked him to your bed, that you... He stopped and bit his lip savagely. He said you wanted him, that you'd asked him to take your maidenhead, Ian said. He spoke coolly with his eyes on Brianna. She drew in breath with a ragged sound like paper being torn. I did. Oh, boy. Ian made a shocked sound, and Brianna drew back a hand like lightning and slapped him across the face. He jerked back, lost his balance, and half fell off the bench. He grabbed the edge of the table and staggered to his feet. How? He shouted, his face contorted in sudden anger. How could you do such a thing? I told Uncle Jamie that you'd never play the whore, never. But it's true, isn't it? She was on her feet like a leopard, her cheeks gone from white to blazing fury in a second. Well, damn you for a self-righteous prig, Ian. Who gave you the right to call me a whore? Right? He sputtered for a moment at a loss for words. He... Before I could intervene, she drew back a fist and punched him hard in the pit of the stomach. With the look of intense surprise, he sat down hard on the floor, mouth open, like a suckling pig. Here we are. The whole thing is coming out. Jamie was under the misguided assumption that now she'd cried wolf and was never raped. He could not allow himself to kill a man when he wasn't sure at the time if it was rape. I did regret it, he said very quietly. When I came that night and saw you, I was sorry that I hadn't killed him. I held you in my arms, and I felt my heart go small with shame, that I should doubt my daughter's virtue. He looked down, and I could see the mark where he had bitten his lip. Now my heart is shrunk altogether. Not only that you should be impure, but that you should lie to me. Lie to you? Lie to you? Aye, lie to me. With sudden violence, he turned back to her. That you should bid a man from lust and cry rape when you find you're with child. Do you not realize that's the only chance I have not the sin of murder on my soul, and you the cause of it? She was too furious to speak. I saw her throat swell with words, and I knew I had to do something at once before either of them had the opportunity to say more. Imagine being in the room while this was going on. Claire pulled the gold ring from her pocket. Jamie looked at it, his face gone completely blank. Brianna drew in her breath with a sob. That's your ring, Auntie, Ian said. He sounded dazed and bent close to look, as though he couldn't believe his eyes. Your gold ring, the one that Bonnet took from you on the river. Yes, I said. My knees felt weak. I sat down at the table and laid my hand over the telltale ring as though to take it back, deny its presence. Jamie took my wrist and lifted it. Like a man handling a dangerous insect, he picked the ring up gingerly between thumb and forefinger. Where did you get this? He asked. His voice almost casual. He looked at me, and a bolt of terror shot through me at the look in his eyes. I brought it to her. Brianna's tears had dried, evaporated by the heat of her fury. She stood behind me and gripped me by the shoulders. Don't you look at her that way. Don't you dare. He shifted the look to her, but she didn't flinch, only held on to me harder, her fingers digging into my shoulders. Where did you get it? He asked again, his voice no more than a whisper. Where? From him, from Stephen Bonnet. Her voice was shaking, but from rage, not fear. When he raped me. Jamie stood rigid in the middle of the room. Young Ian could only say the name. Claire retreated into the corner, knowing she betrayed Jamie and Roger by not telling Jamie about the name of the rapist. She had betrayed Brianna, having assisted in damning Roger. Brianna looked into Jamie's face and muttered cruelty. Damn you, she said, scarcely audible. Damn you very much, you bastard. I'm sorry I ever saw you. Now we all need to take a breath. That was rough. These last 6 chapters, they just build and build and build until we get to this point, and all hell has broken loose. How was that for a happy family meeting? Claire feels guilty for not telling Jamie that Brianna had slept with Roger, then was raped later by Bonnet. Is she guilty? What do you think? Brianna felt betrayed by Jamie and young Ian's sense of honor and duty to protect her. Who holds the bulk of the responsibility in this horrific mess? Communication and assumption are at the heart of all of this. What are your thoughts? Jamie should never have acted out of assumption and partial knowledge. Brianna should have said she was raped after being handfasted to Roger and consummating their marriage. She still hadn't divulged that little detail. Claire should have said more. Brianna and Claire should have said Roger's full name. Was Brianna right in being so angry and saying something so cruel? Can you picture yourself in this position? This is where so many things are flying around. I could talk about the culture of the day, the religion of the day, all of those things historically. But in some senses, I don't think a whole lot of this has changed. Except your dad cannot go out and beat the crap out of somebody who got you pregnant, right? Because he'd go to jail these days. I mean, when I was young, if a dad would have gone and beat the hell out of somebody for raping you, he would have most likely gotten off and had no time at all. Unless he murdered somebody. And then it would be like a murder of passion and still would not get as much time. Or he would be declared incompetent, insane. But there were no laws like we have now. I mean, they had the governing laws of the colony. But at the time, that would have been totally justifiable murder. He was totally justified in beating the hell out of him, both of them together, and then giving him to the Iroquois. Nobody would have asked. It was his land, his daughter. Because remember, Claire and Brianna are more property than not. It's very difficult for women to exercise any rights that they have. And they couldn't vote, couldn't do anything. So this is a pretty dicey scenario. So what do you think? If you put yourself into Jamie's 18th century mind, no matter how educated he is, etc., what do you think of how he responded? Was it solely because he's her father? Did it have to do with his rape? I mean, this is very complicated, right? But I do think it was reactionary. And he didn't have full information. Because he's so painstaking about getting detail for when they've done all their political endeavors, and whenever he has to go and fight in something, it's all about the detail. Except here, minimal detail. Claire is usually the one that flies off half-cocked, right? She was the one who was holding the information and didn't say anything to him. She didn't say that she'd been with Roger and she was raped. Like that it was 2 separate things. She didn't even give enough information for that to happen. I mean, even though they had done what they did, it was the same day. They could have gone and, after him before he was actually in the hands of the Iroquois. There's a lot here. And I know there's some definite touchy subjects and buttons, and I hope I was able to say everything well by the meaning behind this, because it's really hard. And I know families are in this kind of situation all the time, in the sense of they find out their daughter is pregnant, she's not married, or it was by rape, and they want to help figure out the best solution. They don't always go about it in the right ways. We have more stiff legalities surrounding it now and some social mores when it comes to what you can just be a vigilante. But the basic underlying family structure and culture, it hasn't changed that much in a lot of places. And a lot of religious foundations and just how the world view is. I mean, there's a lot of women in this world who only have partial legal rights. And they're the ones who get into serious trouble and could even be put to death because they're pregnant. A man kisses them, they can get put to death. So when they had nothing to do with it, they were just, I don't know, existing in the world. So these are some very complex social issues. And regardless of time, there are challenges here. I mean, era-wise in time. So I'd really love your thoughts on this because it's very complex. Next week, we are doing chapters 51 through 53. Hopefully, we will get a little break from the intensity, but I don't know. We might not. You know, these books are all adventuresome. I know. And I'm just distressed for poor Roger. I'm still like screaming over in my head over the fact that nobody gave his family name and they didn't at least let Jamie know there was a second man, and Claire was too fearful to show the ring, etc., etc. Yeah, ugh. I'm glad we're past this point because it's very hard for me. Okay, so I did get a couple of emails from Frances Yancey. Hi, Frances. And she said, just listen to the podcast, and I think I have a most unique take on the events. I am adopted. We adopted our daughter. I do not understand the emphasis on how odd it is that a parent can love a child not of their body. Considering the number of maternal deaths of the time and subsequent remarriages, I would think that the stepchildren were often loved. I will stop there for a moment. A lot of people really do not love the same, whether it's their blood or if it's not. I was a stepchild, and my step-grandparents totally did treat us differently than the grandchildren of their own blood. 100% differently. We were not seen the same. We were not treated the same, and I think it's fairly common. I love everybody. Like, for me, if I've known you long enough and we become close friends, you become family. Like, you can't just stay my acquaintance. Or you're just you're an acquaintance that I adore, but you don't get closer. Other than that, you become like, hey, come into my family and I love you. So, no, not everyone can do it. A lot of people, it just hits things inside of them that aren't pretty and that are self-serving and selfish, and I'm sure have to do with insecurities. I mean, I don't see anybody as any different. I've always said that too. Like, people are adopted every day. What does it matter? And in this time period, no. Stepchildren could be beat and tormented and made to be almost servants. It's kind of the Cinderella theme. My stepmother certainly did not treat me well. I won't speak on behalf of my siblings, but I was treated poorly. Very poorly. And yeah, so I think that there has been a history of stepchildren not being treated well, and they were being used as chattel and servants. So I'm glad that you had better experiences and that you gave an adopted child, your child, the child of your heart. That's my thing. The child of the heart is just as important as a child of the womb. And when my husband and I got married, I'll share a personal detail. I said if we were unable to have children because of him or me, or both, that I would not do anything extraordinary and that we could adopt children because it didn't matter where they came from. It didn't matter to me who they were born from, but that they would be born into my heart. So I agree with you, Frances. Then she goes on to say, now the meaty stuff. I found my birth mother, and when I did, what she told me that what my parents had been told was not true. She did not have a boyfriend. A man living at her aunt's boarding house raped her at knife point. This I heard over the phone while I was standing stark naked, dripping on a towel. All I could think to say was that I guess I will blame all of my bad characteristics on him. I had to get back in the shower after the phone call. We were in Calgary and she was in Halifax, the other side of the country. But we were going to a convention. We did meet. She told me that her mother never said anything to her. but rather put a note in her pants saying to go to the nuns as she was leaving. Her family name. Her sister said not to name her after her. About a decade ago, my 14-year-old daughter changed her behavior. It was as if she was glued to my side. One day my husband gave her a surprise hug. Later he asked me if I thought she was pregnant, as her tummy seemed hard. She denied it. We went swimming one day, and a few days later went on holidays. While on the trip, we went to the largest mall in North America at the time. My husband and son went off to pick out back-to-school clothes, while my daughter and I went for the same chore. Finally, I was really tired, so I went to the changing room with her so I could sit down. She was trying to put one top on at a time. She was trying to put on one top at the same time. Instead of taking the other off, I grabbed her shirt and stared at an 8-month belly. Before I was a parent, I always thought it would be a good idea to have a scenario in place should I find myself in that situation. I took her in my arms and told her I loved her. Oh, Frances, that makes me want to kiss you. I got back to the hotel and asked her how it happened. Before she answered, I told her I didn't care if she did a striptease. I emphasized that the truth was the only thing necessary. It was a date rape situation. It was hard for her father to fully believe that it happened like that. But I reminded her that I made her come with me to this boy's house, and she had left all of her new makeup there. She was almost in hysterics. 3 weeks later, she gave birth to a daughter. She had already decided to place her for adoption. That open adoption is a whole other story. So the rape of Brianna is something I can relate to from a mother's perspective and as a child of rape. It happened to them. They were not in that situation of their own volition. I went to university in 71 when life was, say, open. I was lucky to be aware enough to get myself out of a few situations that were heading in that direction. I knew girls who weren't as lucky. There was always the question of what more could they have done. I was a senior in residence and in nursing, so I could be physically safe. Brianna reacted in the only way she could have. Jamie's demonstration was shocking the first time I read it. Then, I think it must be a matter of age. It still makes an impression. I too go nuts about the name issue, plus it is funny that Brianna had never described Roger. I think that would have been natural to describe him. I believe it would have been handy if she managed to tell them they are handfast. Jamie went too far. A beating could be expected given the time. There was a lot of tarnish on the king of men, but then giving him to the First Nations was going too far. It says a lot about Roger that he eventually able to get over the wrong done to him. Thank you for that, Frances, and just that you would share such intimacy with us. And I have an email from Meredith that I missed last week. I'm sorry. She says she has very mixed feelings about these chapters and the ones coming up. On the one hand, Jamie shouldn't have done what he did. But in order for Jamie to stay in character, how could he not? Jamie has had so much rape ruining his family that he reached a boiling point. Claire and Jenny were nearly raped by Blackjack. Fergus was raped, so was Ian. And of course, Jamie himself. So it's no wonder that he would go after Brianna's so-called rapist. And unfortunately, part of the reasoning for doing it is Roger himself. In Jamie's view, Brianna's whole future with Roger is in jeopardy because she's no longer a maiden and because she's pregnant. In the 18th century, men break off engagements when it turns out their girl is no longer a virgin. On top of that, Jamie knows Brianna wouldn't cheat on Roger with the stranger, so there's no question that any other party than Roger would have to be the rapist. As for Roger himself, I feel like this is classic karma. Roger lied to Brianna about the death notice. Brianna then lied to Roger about going through the stones, forcing Roger into following her rather than accompanying her. And now here's Jamie lying to his family about the entire encounter with the so-called rapist. I know Roger's innocent of the rape, but he isn't innocent of other things. He was willing to condemn both Jamie and Claire to death in a fire, so it seems only reasonable that there should be some consequence for that. He's being punished, but for the wrong offense. But I have to say that, as much as I like Roger, I wouldn't have liked it if he got off scot-free. That was a pun intended. He can't get off scot-free. Therefore, he must deal with the very large Scot. Oh, Meredith, you're so good. I do understand Jamie not getting the name mix up. He doesn't think of Brianna as having another name because the other name is Randall. He can't bear thinking about Claire or Brianna using that name, which he considers stained with Blackjack's dishonor. Interesting. It's pretty obvious that Claire didn't tell Jamie about Roger's connection to their family tree through Dougal. She should have, but I suppose Dougal isn't talked about much in that house. And Mackenzie is a very common name, and not all of them are related to Jamie's family. So why should Jamie suspect what happened? What I do object to is that Jamie would come home and not tell anyone what he and Ian did. After all, Brianna still thinks her rapist is out there. Why would Jamie put her through that, thinking that he's been taken care of? Is it simply that he didn't go through with killing Roger because a part of him believed he wasn't raping her? This is the classic Jamie. Most fathers would be ashamed to admit they sought out a rapist and tried to kill him. But with the twisted morality of the era, it's shameful to Jamie to seek out a rapist and then spare them. It's just like when Jamie wanted to kill Blackjack in the second book. It's not murder if it's a duel and it's vengeance. Try running that logic by the cops in today's world. Yes, it's a little bit different. If you go up to a rapist and killer and tell them you intend to kill them in an armed fight, would the cops stand aside and say, "Fine, we won't stop you"? Jamie would think of today's laws as ridiculous and dishonorable, that you're not allowed to kill bad people yourself, that only cops are allowed to chase after the bad guys and maim them. Jamie could never live with those restrictions. Of course, many people in today's world feel the same way. Sincerely, Meredith of Everett, Washington. You're right. It just was a very different time. Very different. And the building blocks were still happening with our laws. I mean, it wasn't even the United States of America. There wasn't Canada yet. So we had colonies and wilderness and tribal people who were here before us. So thank you for that. And I think that Roger's punishment comes in other ways. But I think that was between him and Brianna, and I think that would be really like mistaken karma. Like it was too much of an offense. And I don't think it was that he wanted them to be doomed to die in a fire. It's because he didn't believe they could change it if they tried. Yes, and he never should have kept it from her. I agree. Okay, so I want your feedback. contact@adramofOutlander.com or 719-425-9444. Go to Facebook and please ask to join the A Dram of Outlander group. We want to keep it growing. The conversation's all about you. You get to talk to each other. You get to discuss. Unlike the page where I drive it, you get to drive the group. Instagram and Twitter, it's Dram of Outlander. And of course, the website is adramofoutlander.com, much to your surprise. And if you'd really like to help me, you can go to iTunes, through Apple Podcasts, and give me a review. The higher the review, the easier it is for people to find me. It will help me very much. So if you like the podcast, give me a 5-star review. I appreciate you. You can go on to Google Play and Stitcher and Spotify and leave reviews as well. Please, please, please. It takes you seconds. You don't even have to say what you like about it. Just leave the stars. You could also help support the podcast financially. How do you do that? Patreon.com/adramofOutlander, and you can do a monthly giving. It can be as small as $1 because every single dollar counts. I'm a single podcaster and I do everything myself, pay for everything myself, and I love doing it, but it is costly. So I appreciate your help. If you like listening to me every week and you want me to be able to offer more to you, I appreciate you supporting me financially as well. If you'd like to do a one-time offering, drop me a voicemail or email, and I will tell you how to do that. And please share the podcast. Interact with each other on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Comment. Talk to me. Let's build more of a community here. I mean, we all love Outlander, and that is enough to cover so many other things and to bring us together. So, I appreciate you, and I'm glad we're past this part of the books. There's some parts are really not easy coming up, but far easier than these last 6 chapters, because these are doing me in, let me tell you. But I'm so happy to be here with you, and I thank you for listening, and until next time, Slán je va.